She was a relic, and the thin, high-altitude air of forward operating base Kestrel made her feel every one of her 57 years. Major Kavak was an administrative fossil assigned to a unit of apex predators, a fact made clear by the dismissive glances of soldiers young enough to be her grandsons. They saw the deep-set lines around her eyes, the deliberate, almost slow economy of her movements, and the anachronistic rifle she kept cased in her small quarters. They saw a career officer put out to pasture. But relics have histories, and in the quiet hum of the base, a history was waiting to be exhumed. The crisis that would force their hands was already brewing in the jagged peaks that surrounded them, a storm of violence gathering just beyond the horizon. Major Kavak arrived with 2 duffels and a long, hardened rifle case that seemed fused to her hand. The air at 10,000 feet was a blade in the lungs, sharp and unforgiving. FOB Kestrel was a gravel and Hesco barrier scab on the face of a desolate mountain range, a temporary home for the military's most elite long-range specialists. Anya was assigned to them as a liaison and logistics officer, a title so transparently bureaucratic it was an insult. Her job was to count bullets and file reports to stay out of the way of the real soldiers. She was met not by the base commander, but by a corporal with a clipboard and an air of weary impatience. He pointed her toward a small, prefabricated container that was to be her quarters. It was isolated from the main barracks where the sniper teams lived, a physical manifestation of her peripheral status. Inside, the space was sterile and cold. She unpacked with a methodical precision that belied her supposed obsolescence. First came the sparse sets of fatigues, then a small collection of worn books, and finally, she laid the rifle case on her cot. She unlatched it with the reverence of a priest opening a tabernacle. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not the sleek polymer and carbon fiber M2010 the other teams used, but a heavily modified SVDM2. It was a Dragunov, a weapon many of the young snipers would have only seen in museums or training videos about enemy armaments. But this one was different. Its wooden furniture was replaced with a modern, adjustable stock. The barrel was free-floated, and the scope mounted on it was a piece of German glass worth more than the corporal's car. It was a classic chassis built out with cutting-edge components, a perfect metaphor for the woman who owned it. She began to clean it, her hands moving with a fluid, practiced grace. Each component was wiped, oiled, and inspected. It was a ritual, a silent conversation with an old friend. Through the small window of her container, she could see the young men of the platoon, laughing and swaggering back from the mess hall. They were lions in their prime, and she, in their eyes, was little more than a ghost. The next morning, the dismissal was given a voice. Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, the sniper chief, stood in the doorway of her container, blocking the morning sun. He was 32, with a physique carved from granite and an ego to match. His eyes flicked from Anya to the disassembled rifle on her cot, and a smirk played on his lips. "Major Kavak," he began, the rank sounding like an accusation. "I've reviewed your file. Seems you've spent the last 10 years behind a desk at command. Not much call for high-angle ballistics in the Pentagon's basement." He gestured with his chin toward her rifle. "What is that thing? Did you win it in a raffle?" Anya continued to wipe down the bolt carrier, her expression unreadable. "It's a designated marksman rifle, Master Sergeant. Chambered in 762 by 54 rimmed." Her voice was low and steady, a stark contrast to Thorne's aggressive cadence. "It's reliable in extreme temperatures." Thorne chuckled, a harsh, condescending sound. "Look, Major, we're running a high-tempo, high-tech operation here. My guys are using integrated ballistic computers, laser rangefinders that talk to their scopes, and rifles that cost more than your pension. We don't have time to babysit personnel who aren't field current." The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Your predecessor was a captain who understood his role was to handle our ammunition requisitions and leave the trigger pulling to us. I expect the same from you." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder. "The supply depot is next to the motor pool. Corporal Carter will show you the inventory sheets. Try not to get any rust from that museum piece on the new ammunition crates." He turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. Anya slowly finished reassembling her rifle, the final click of the receiver cover echoing in the quiet container. The dismissal was absolute. She was not a warrior here. She was a clerk, and she was to remember her place. For the next week, Anya Kavak embraced her exile. She spent her days in the dusty, cavernous supply depot, counting boxes of M118LR ammunition, verifying lot numbers on concussion grenades, and updating spreadsheets on a ruggedized laptop. Corporal Ben Carter, the young soldier assigned to assist her, was initially wary. He was one of Thorne's protégés, a gifted spotter with a bright future. To him, Anya was an enigma, a piece of living history that didn't fit. But he was disciplined and polite, and he watched her. He saw that she didn't just count the boxes. She inspected them. She'd run a finger along the seals, check for any signs of moisture damage, and occasionally open a crate to spot-check the condition of the brass. "Humidity is the enemy of consistency," she told him once, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few grains of corroded powder can change your point of impact at 1,000 meters. But her true work began when the inventory was done. She wasn't watching the depot. She was watching the range. From the depot's loading bay, she had a clear, oblique view of the long-distance training area. She saw Thorne's teams practicing. They were good, technically proficient. They lasered a target, plugged the data into their Kestrel weather meters, fed the firing solution into their scopes, and fired. But Anya saw what they didn't. She saw the subtle shiver of mirage rising from the valley floor, a current of air invisible to their electronics. She watched the dust devils that spun up in the afternoon, noting how they altered the wind's direction and velocity at different points along the bullet's flight path. Thorne's training was based on technology, on the assumption that the computer could solve any problem. Anya's knowledge was older, more elemental. It was written in the sway of the sparse grass, the drift of a hawk on a thermal, the distortion of light across 1,000 meters of heated rock. In the pre-dawn hours, before anyone else was awake, she would take her SVDM-2 to a small, unsanctioned firing point she had found, a rocky ledge overlooking a deep ravine. She never used a laser rangefinder. She estimated the distance by milling the size of a distant, rust-colored boulder. She didn't use a weather meter. She watched the vapor of her own breath and tossed a pinch of fine dust into the air. She would fire a single shot, a cold-bore shot, the truest test of a rifle and its shooter. Each morning, a new, tiny chip would appear on the face of that distant boulder, impossibly close to the one from the day before. She was not just counting bullets. She was studying the mountain, learning its secrets, its breath, its moods. She was observing her environment with a focus that the younger men, tethered to their screens, had long forgotten. The pressure began as a crackle over a secured radio frequency. A high-value target, a charismatic and ruthless insurgent commander known as the Wolf, had been tracked to a fortified compound nestled deep in a treacherous valley system codenamed the Serpent's Tooth. Intelligence was solid. He was there, planning a major offensive. The directive from High Command was unequivocal. Neutralize him. The mission fell inevitably to Master Sergeant Thorne and his best team, Alpha. The mood in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, shifted from routine confidence to a wire-taut tension. The Serpent's Tooth was a sniper's nightmare. It was a narrow, winding canyon that acted as a natural wind tunnel, with unpredictable gusts and updrafts that could throw a bullet off course by several feet. Worse, a storm front was moving in from the north, threatening to ground the drones and gunships that would provide overwatch and support. They had a shrinking window. Anya was in the TOC, ostensibly to monitor ammunition expenditure for the after-action report. She stood in the corner, a silent, unobtrusive presence, her eyes fixed on the massive screens displaying topographical maps and grainy drone feeds. Colonel Davies, the base commander, stood at the center of the room, his jaw tight. Thorne was a whirlwind of activity, barking orders, checking gear, and briefing his team with sharp, confident pronouncements. The wind is gusting 20 to 30 knots, variable from the west-northwest, Thorne announced, pointing at a digital overlay. Kestrels are programmed. Solution is dynamic, but we'll have it. We'll insert on the south ridge. Gives us a clean 1,250-meter shot into the main courtyard. He radiated an unshakable faith in his equipment and his men. As Alpha Team departed, a heavy silence fell over the TOC, broken only by the hum of electronics and the hiss of the radio. Anya watched the anemometer readings on one of the screens. The numbers were erratic, jumping wildly. The computer models were struggling to create a stable firing solution. The storm was closing in faster than predicted, the sky outside the TOC window turning a bruised purple. The pressure in the room became a physical weight. Every person in there knew that if Alpha Team missed their shot, the wolf would vanish back into the mountains, and the lives of hundreds of coalition soldiers would be at greater risk. The men in the room were fidgeting, drinking coffee, pacing. Anya remained perfectly still, her gaze never leaving the maps, her posture as calm as a statue in a storm. The call came 90 minutes later, the voice of Alpha's sniper strained with frustration. TOC Alpha. We are in position. We have eyes on the target. But this wind, it's a vortex. Our solutions are all over the place. We're getting conflicting data every 5 seconds. Colonel Davies keyed his mic. What's your confidence, Alpha? The reply was hesitant. Low, sir. Very low. The mirage is boiling. It's like shooting through water. Thorne's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. Trust the tech, Alpha. Find a lull and take the shot on the main screen. A grainy feed from the sniper's scope showed the courtyard. A man matching the wolf's description was walking toward a vehicle, surrounded by guards. This was the moment. Taking the shot, the sniper's voice crackled. A moment of intense silence. Then, nothing. Miss. Shot went high and right. He's spooked. They're moving. Chaos erupted in the TOC. Men shouted, pointing at screens. The wolf was being hustled into a hardened building. The opportunity was gone. Thorne slammed his fist on a console. Damn it! How could you miss? In the corner, Anya moved. She walked calmly from the shadows toward the main communications console. Her movements so deliberate she seemed to pass through the panic untouched. The comms officer, a young lieutenant, looked at her in surprise. Major! Anya ignored him, her eyes locked on the wind speed indicators and the topographical map. She keyed the mic for the command channel. Her voice was quiet but carried an authority that cut through the noise. Alpha, this is Major Kavak. What is your position relative to the target? Stunned silence. Then the spotter's voice, confused. We're on the south ridge, Major. Bearing 340, Anya's eyes traced the canyon on the map. The wind is channeling down the main valley and creating a rotor effect off the cliff face below you. Your instruments are reading the primary wind, not the updraft affecting your trajectory. Thorne spun around, his face a mask of fury. Major, stand down. You are not cleared. Colonel Davies held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at Anya, his eyes narrowed. What's your correction, Major? Anya didn't look at him. She spoke directly into the mic. Alpha. Disregard your computer. This is a Kentucky windage shot. The storm front is creating a pressure differential. You'll have a series of 3 strong gusts, followed by a 3-second lull. On that lull, I want you to hold 2 full mils left of target and 0.3 mils high. Fire on my mark. There was a pause. 2 mils was a massive hold. Felt wrong. It went against everything their training and technology told them. Major, that's... The sniper began. Trust me, Anya said. Her voice held no room for argument. On the screen, they could see the scope's reticle move far to the left of the building's doorway where the wolf had disappeared. It looked like an impossible shot. First gust now, Anya said calmly, watching a monitor no one else was. Second gust, now. Third, get ready. A beat of silence. Fire. The drone feed showed a puff of dust erupt from the wall, 2 feet to the left and a foot above the doorway. It was a perfect shot, landing exactly where she had told him to aim, as the wolf stepped back out for a moment, perhaps thinking the danger had passed. The target collapsed instantly. A stunned silence descended on the TOC, so profound it was almost deafening. Then, the spotter's voice, breathless and full of awe. TOC, target down. I repeat, HVT is neutralized. Good God! It was a perfect hit. The atmosphere in FOB Kestrel underwent a tectonic shift. The whispers that had followed Anya Kavak were no longer dismissive. They were laced with a mixture of confusion and awe. The story of the impossible shot, of the calm, unknown major who had overridden the platoon's expert chief and sophisticated technology with what seemed like arcane magic, spread through the base like wildfire. The younger soldiers, Corporal Carter included, now watched her with a new kind of attention. When she walked from her container to the mess hall, their conversations would dip, and they would nod respectfully. Major, it was no longer a formality. It was a title. They saw her differently. The quiet, elderly woman was replaced by a figure of immense, hidden competence. They started noticing things they'd overlooked. The way her eyes constantly scanned the ridgelines, the way she could tell the ambient temperature within a degree just by the feel of the air on her skin, the almost supernatural stillness she possessed. Master Sergeant Thorne was a man adrift. His entire professional identity was built on a foundation of technological superiority and aggressive expertise. Anya had shattered that foundation with a few calm words. He replayed the incident in his mind, cross-referencing her correction with the post-mission atmospheric data. Her call had been perfect, but it was counterintuitive, a solution no computer would have ever calculated. It came from a place of pure, instinctual understanding. It was experience so deep it bordered on prescience. Driven by a maddening need to understand, Thorne tried to pull up her official service record. He expected to find a mundane career path, a decade in the field long ago, followed by years of staff jobs. Instead, he hit a wall of digital concrete. Her file was a ghost. Her basic information was there: name, rank, date of entry, but her operational history, the entire period from her late 20s to her mid-40s, was a black void. Every entry was stamped with the highest level of classification. Top secret / eyes only / project ghost. The file was so heavily redacted it was mostly black ink. He saw commendations with the citations blacked out, deployment records with the locations blacked out, and training certifications for programs that officially did not exist. Thorne felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't a desk officer being put out to pasture. This was someone being hidden. He was no longer dealing with a relic. He was dealing with a legend, and he didn't even know her name. The success of the mission had an unforeseen and deadly consequence. The elimination of the Wolf had not decapitated the insurgency. It had enraged it. In retaliation, they deployed their own specialist, a sniper known only as Jin, a ghost who had been credited with over 30 coalition kills. Jin's mission was simple: revenge, and his first target was Alpha Team. 2 days after their successful shot, while scouting a new Overwatch position, Alpha Team walked into Jin's trap. The first crack of a high-velocity round sent them diving for cover. Their radio man was hit, his leg shattered. They were pinned down on an exposed shale slope with minimal cover, 1,000 meters from an enemy they couldn't see. The TOC erupted into controlled chaos. Drones were scrambled, but Jin was a master of camouflage. He was firing from somewhere on a vast, opposing rock face, a maze of shadows and crevices. Every time a drone tried to get a low-angle look, a round would snap past it, forcing it back. Jin was toying with them, keeping them pinned, waiting for the perfect moment to finish them off. Colonel Davies's face was grim. "Where is he? We can't send a quick reaction force in there until we suppress that sniper." Thorne was sweating, his confidence gone, replaced by the raw fear of a commander about to lose his men. He directed thermal imaging scans, acoustic sensors, everything in his technological arsenal. Nothing. Jin was invisible. His hide was perfect. He fired from one position, then moved unseen to another, his muzzle flash completely suppressed. Thorne's best counter-sniper team was on standby, but he couldn't give them a target. He was failing. His men were going to die, and he was powerless to stop it. Swallowing every ounce of his pride, Thorne turned and walked across the TOC. He stopped in front of Anya, who was standing by the topographical map table, her gaze distant, as if she were already on that mountain with them. The entire room fell silent, watching. Major, Thorn's voice was strained, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. It was a plea. We can't find him. They've got maybe 30 minutes of daylight left. After that, we're blind. My men are exposed. Can you help us? He was asking her to do the impossible again, to see a ghost. Anya didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on the large, detailed map of the area, her finger tracing the contour lines of the enemy ridge. She listened to the audio feed from Alpha Team's comms, the sharp, distinct crack of Jin's rifle, followed a second later by the sonic boom of the bullet passing over their heads. She closed her eyes for a moment, processing not just the data, but the sound, the rhythm, the very character of the unseen enemy. Give me the live feed from Drone 3, she said, her voice calm. The one holding high orbit, the feed filled the main screen, a god's-eye view of the sprawling, sun-baked ridge. It was a meaningless jumble of rock and shadow to everyone else. To Anya, it was a page of text she knew how to read. She pointed to a small, insignificant-looking dark spot, a narrow fissure between two large boulders that looked like 1,000 others. There, she said. He's in that fissure. It gives him a 10-degree firing arc on Alpha's position and is in deep shadow from the afternoon sun. He's dug in. Thorn stared at the screen, then at her. Major, with respect, that's just a shadow. Thermal shows nothing. How can you possibly know? Anya finally turned to look at him, her eyes holding a depth of experience that made him feel like a child. Because he's patient, she began, her voice low and instructive. He's using a thick, water-cooled suppressor sleeve. That's why there's no thermal signature and no visible muzzle flash. But it's heavy. It means he isn't moving far between shots, just shifting his position within the hide. And listen, she gestured to the speaker. The sound of his shot. The initial crack is traveling down the canyon, but the secondary echo is coming from higher up. It's bouncing off the rock face above that fissure. His hide is deep like a small cave. She then pointed to a tiny, barely perceptible detail on the drone feed. And look there. Every time he fires, see that puff of dust? It's not from his muzzle. It's from the concussion. It's being displaced from the ground about 5 feet in front of and below that fissure. He's built a fortified position. A spider hole he's not leaving. The level of forensic detail was staggering. She was deconstructing the scene from miles away using sound, shadow, and a tiny wisp of dust. Thorn was speechless. He keyed his mic and relayed the coordinates to his waiting countersniper team. As they began to move, he turned back to Anya, his mind reeling, the question that had been burning inside him finally breaking free. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Major, I've been doing this for 15 years. I have never seen anyone read terrain like that. No one. Who trained you? Anya was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the map, to a past he couldn't imagine. She finally met his eyes, and there was no pride in her own, only the weight of memory. I wasn't trained by anyone you've ever heard of, Master Sergeant, she said softly. I was the one who wrote the doctrine for them. I was the lead instructor for the Asymmetric Warfare Group's first experimental long-range interdiction program. A project so deep they buried it after the mission was over. She paused, letting the words settle in the silent room. My call sign was Spectre. My private instructor, before I ever joined the service, was a man who understood that wind and shadow were the only tools that never lied. He was a retired veteran of a different war, a different country. His name was Vasily. Thorn froze. The name Vasily was generic, but in the context of sniping, it carried a singular, thunderous weight. But it was the call sign that paralyzed him. Spectre. It wasn't just a legend. It was a foundational myth of modern special operations. A ghost story they told rookie snipers to scare them, a boogeyman said to have made impossible shots in forgotten conflicts, an operator whose existence was officially denied but whose work had literally written the book on modern countersniping and deep infiltration. The Spectre program, Project Ghost, it was a chapter of black operations so secret that most high-ranking generals didn't know it had ever existed. Thorn had always assumed it was an exaggeration, a composite of a dozen different operators. He was staring at the source of the myth. He was staring at a ghost in the flesh. As his mind struggled to process the revelation, a voice crackled over the radio, clear and sharp. It was the leader of the counter-sniper team. Tosi Hunter 2. We have target neutralized. I repeat, target is down. A pause. The hide was exactly where you said it would be, Major. A fortified spider hole. We wouldn't have found it in 1,000 years. The entire TOC heard it. Every operator, every analyst, every officer in the room turned to look at Anya. The air was thick with a new, profound understanding. When Anya turned and walked toward the exit, the sea of bodies parted for her. The young men she passed, the ones who had smirked and whispered, now stood a little straighter, their eyes wide with a respect that bordered on veneration. As she reached the door, Master Sergeant Thorne stepped in front of her. He didn't speak. He simply came to attention, his back ramrod straight, and raised his right hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture an NCO gives an officer. It was the deep, solemn salute of a warrior acknowledging a master. The following morning, the sun crested the eastern peaks, casting long, cool shadows across FOB Kestrel. The air was still, the previous day's storm having scrubbed the sky clean. Anya Kavak stood on the same rocky ledge she had used for her private practice, looking out over the ravine. The world was quiet, washed in the soft gold of dawn. She wasn't holding her rifle. In her palm, she held a single, spent brass casing, the one recovered from the counter-sniper shot that had saved Alpha Team. The metal was cool against her skin. She polished its smooth surface with her thumb, her expression thoughtful, distant. She wasn't reveling in victory, but simply acknowledging the conclusion of a violent equation. She had restored a balance. A quiet footstep on the gravel behind her made her turn. It was Corporal Carter, the young soldier who had been her reluctant assistant in the supply depot. He stood a respectful distance away, holding 2 steaming mugs. He looked different. The youthful arrogance was gone, replaced by a humble, earnest curiosity. He looked at her not as an old woman, but as a monument. "Major," he said, his voice quiet. He held out one of the mugs. "Coffee. Black." I figured. Anya's lips curved in a smile so faint it was barely perceptible. She accepted the mug, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." Corporal Carter didn't leave. He stood beside her, sipping his own coffee, the two of them looking out at the vast, silent landscape. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. He wanted to ask about Spectre, about the shots she'd made, the places she'd been. But he understood, with a wisdom beyond his years, that the silence was the answer. It was a shared moment of peace, a passing of the torch not through words, but through mutual presence. The dignity that had been stripped from her upon her arrival had been returned, not by command or by regulation, but earned through sheer, undeniable competence. The relic had been revealed not as an object of the past, but as the very standard by which the future would be measured. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the mountains she knew so intimately, Anya Kavak stood not as a ghost of a forgotten war, but as a quiet, enduring master of her craft, at peace in the silence she had commanded.